ANC also. The spokesperson of the CPP was responding to violent incident yesterday at the protest. Group of Liberians have gathered to protest, to draw the concern of the government to the increasing wave of rape cases across the country. And it's now a matter of public knowledge that that entire incident was characterized by protest, violent response from the government forces yesterday. So we're now turn the pendulum over to the chairman emeritus of the ANC, Anthony Olushogu, who will be reading the statement, after which we are going to entertain at most 3 questions from the press. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me acknowledge political leaders of the 4 collaborating political parties, Ambassador Joe Boyka, Honorable Benina Yuri, Senator Yombi Kanga Lawrence, and Honorable Alexander Cummins, and chairpersons of the respective executive committees, and our chairman of the National Executive Committee of the CPP, Liberians home and abroad, supporters and sympathizers of the CPP, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It can be recalled that about a couple of weeks ago, a group of civil society organizations announced plans to hold a 3-day peaceful march to create awareness on the ever-surging wave of rape and other forms of gender-based violence cases across the country, and petition the government of President George Weah to rise from its slumber and decisively address the situation. On Tuesday, August 25, 2020, the protest, which is said to have been catalyzed by a recent report indicating that approximately 1,000 women, girls, and babies have been raped since January 2020, got underway. Among these latest victims of rape is a 3-year-old baby whose vagina was allegedly ripped apart with a razor blade by her victimizer before executing his demonic act. Before the march, there were widespread rumors about plans by some unscrupulous individuals to infiltrate the campaigners, demoralize their efforts by giving the campaign a negative political clout, and cause disruptions. Although the campaigners were resilient and determined in overcoming this plot, the rumors became a reality on day 1 of the march, when well-known regime apologists and thugs visibly infiltrated the campaigners and began causing confusion. They started to hush their plans by trying to dictate whom to participate in a march that they, the thugs, didn't organize. On day 2 of the campaign, these very thugs forcibly made their way through the crowd and threw stones at the campaigners, thereby injuring several persons. On yesterday, the early hours of the last day of the march, police officers were unusually seen deployed in large numbers at various parts of the city in what many thought was preparation by the police to protect the anti-rape campaigners against their unprovoked attackers. As it turned out to be, the police was deployed to prevent the campaigners from exercising their constitutional rights to assemble and petition their government as enshrined in Article 17 of the Liberian Constitution. Media reports have shown that the police acted unlawfully by arresting and brutalizing the campaigners. In some instances, seizing the personal effects and randomly molesting anyone who wore black. The announced dress code of the campaigners. The foregoing circumstances are indicative of continuous well-orchestrated plans by the Weah administration to violate the constitutional rights peaceful Liberians and patronize lawlessness, as has always been the trademark of his government. What is further noteworthy and sad, but perhaps not surprising, is the blatant refusal of our president and self-proclaimed feminist-in-chief to receive the petition of the campaigners despite frantic efforts to meet with him during the first 2 days of the campaign. This is evidence of the government's complicity and lack of commitment to ending the widespread abuse of women, girls, and children in our country. During the late afternoon hours of yesterday, Liberians from all walks of life were glued to the radio when the government announced that the President Weah has scheduled a 5 p.m. radio address on ELBC to respond to the concerns of the campaigners. Liberians had also anticipated that he would have dealt with the unprofessional actions of the Liberian National Police against the campaigners. As it has always been, the president disappointed Liberians by his usual blame shifting and shouted justification of the capricious failures of his government to demonstrate leadership during very critical moments. That the president who assured that procuring 2 DNA machines is already a sufficient step by his government towards ending rape is quite frustrating. We would like to have President Weah understand that the procurement of 2 DNA machines is inconsequential to ensuring that the volume of rape cases on the dockets of our courts are expeditiously adjudicated to ensure that the role of deterrence is stricken against perpetrators of rape. Although the purchasing of 2 DNA machines for a country of approximately 4.5 million people is a necessary but inefficient step to providing cases of rape, it is in no way a substitute for the lack of extension of the specialized court for rape in the 15 political subdivisions of our country. It does not also make up for the failure of the government through the gender, education, and internal affairs ministers, etc., to engage in a national crusade educating our people to stand up against rape. In his radio address on the ELBC, the president also explicitly gave support to the brutal and unprofessional actions of the Liberian National Police against the anti-rape campaigners and prejudiced any future investigation into the conduct of the police when he indicated that they were people among the protesters bent on causing trouble. The action of the president can be viewed as a reason why no investigation has been conducted into continuous acts of lawlessness against peaceful Liberians by some elements of the Liberian National Police, whom themselves had people accused of rape in their ranks. Not only do these continuous violent actions of the Liberian National Police against peaceful Liberians violate the provisions of Liberian Constitution, but they also violate the provision of several international human rights instruments that Liberia is a signatory to, including but not limited to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights adopted by the UN General Assembly on 16 December 1966, which commits states parties to respect the civil and political rights of individuals, including the right to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. The African Chapter on Human Rights and People's Rights, also known as the Banjul Chapter, the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, etc. The president also indicated that during his radio address, this continuous protest by Liberians under his watch are evidence that his government upholds the tenets of democracy. Mr. President, this is flawed reasoning. As the word implies, and in most cases, protests are held to express resentment against societal ills. Rightfully so, all the protests that have been held since you became president have been against the excesses of your regime. And the conduct of your police force during these protests also defeats your argument about upholding good tenets of democracy. As we move closer to December 8, 2020 special senatorial elections, the events of yesterday bring a sad memory of previous acts of police brutality against Liberians, which are yet to be investigated. We like to recount electoral violence in Montserrat County, District 13 and 15 by-elections, which even Taylor Dewey was a victim of, and Cornelius Pratt, two very fine Liberian professional women. Those by-elections resulted in the destruction of property and injured several peaceful Liberians. The killing of a baby in West Point by an officer of the LNP during the onset of COVID-19 lockdown, the shooting to death of a young man by officers of the LNP in 2019, the attack on peaceful protesters of the Council of Patriots, etc. These cases of human rights violations and injustices are reminiscent of those giving rise to previous civil unrest in our country. As our country prepares for the special senatorial elections on December 8, 2020, we call on ECOWAS, the AU, and all our international partners to prevail on the WIA administration to ensure that this menace is killed before it further degenerates to serious civil unrest. Signs that Liberians are becoming increasingly enraged over the poor performance of the WIA administration and the growing political tension in neighboring Guinea and Ivory Coast provide sufficient reasons to bring pressure to bear on the WIA administration to end police brutality and all forms of injustices against our people. On the issue of tackling continuous search in cases of rape across the country, the CPP requests President WIA to put aside his pride and meet with the organizers of yesterday's protest, who are entirely Liberians, and hear their propositions on ways of addressing the situation. We also urge the President to establish a special non-partisan-based national task force on rape and show the decentralization of the specialized court for rape in all parts of the country, create rehabilitation and reintegration opportunities for victims of rape, and facilitate a national multi-stakeholder dialogue on tackling rape. As a people, we must also begin to teach our children those values which discourage the culture of rape and impunity, promote responsible citizenship, and support all reasonable and legal efforts to end the rape epidemic in our country. We acknowledge the efforts of those anti-rape campaigners. We applaud their efforts to stand up against rape in the face of the threats and harassment, assure them of the unflinching support of the CPP in this regard. On behalf of our leaders of the four collaborating political parties, Honorable Bernard Ayue, Senator Yomli Kanga Lawrence, Ambassador Joseph Newman Boyka, and Honorable Alexander B. Cummings, we say a big thank you to all of you for coming to our call. Let's rally to end rape and ensure that there is no breathing space for violence in our country. We thank you.
Thank you. We take a few questions. Is there any?
Yes, my name is Henry Kamo and I report for Front-Page. My question is to Ms. Yuri Taylor Yuri. You were part of the organizers of the anti-rape protest.
No, I was not one of the organizers.
You were also saying on one of those days protesting against rape.
Yeah.
So today you are on the table with the CPP to address issues of police handling of protesters. Many will see as something as conflict of interest. Now you were part of it and then being a part of the CPP to condemn the very thing.
Well, let me put it this way. The organizers of the protest made it clear that it was not a political protest. They did not want politicians coming there in any political t-shirts, or they did not want supporters of candidates coming there in any kind of political attire. Before I'm a member of CPP, I'm a Liberian, I'm a woman. This issue affects all of us beyond party lines, and there's no way that we will see our country affected by such such a surge in cases of rape, and I sit aside and say because I'm political I won't take a part. So yes, I supported the protest. I did not play a leading role, as I said, but all women should be involved. This is a Liberian issue. It's not a political issue. This is not only about the government of Liberia.